Part of me can't resist hoping that somebody's reading this with me because it is a very good book. My Angelou, I know why the caged bird sings. Thou shalt not be dirty, and thou shalt not be impudent, were the two commandments of Grandmother Henderson, upon which hung our total salvation. Each night in the bitterest winter we were forced to wash faces, arms, necks, legs, and feet before going to bed. She used to add with a smirk that unprofane people can't control when venturing into profanity. And wash as far as possible, child. Then wash possible. We would go to the well and wash in the ice-cold clear water, grease our legs with the equally cold, stiff Vaseline, then tiptoe into the house. We'd wipe the dust from our toes and settle down for schoolwork. Settled down for schoolwork. Cornbread, clabbered milk, prayers, and bed, always in that order. Mama was famous for pulling the quilts off after we'd fallen asleep to examine our feet. If they weren't clean enough for her, she took the switch. She kept one behind the bedroom door for emergencies and woke up the offender with a few aptly placed burning reminders. The area around the well at night was dark and slick, and the boys told about how snakes love water, so that anyone who had to draw water at night and then stand there alone and wash knew that moccasins and rattlers, puff adders and boa constrictors were winding their way to the well and would arrive just as the person washing got soap in her eyes. But Mama convinced us not only was cleanliness next to godliness, dirtiness was the inventor of misery. The impudent child was detested by God and a shame to the parents and could bring destruction to its house and its line, which means everybody in the family. All the adults had to be addressed as Mr., Mrs., Miss, Auntie, cousin, uncle, Bubba, sister, brother, and 1,000 other appellations indicating familial relationship and the lowliness of the addresser. That's the little kid that was talking to them. Everyone I knew respected their customary laws except for the po-white trash children. Some families of po-white trash lived on Mama's farmland behind the school. Sometimes a gaggle of them came to the store, filling the whole room, chasing out the air, and even changing the well-known scents. The children crawled over the shelves and into the potato and onion bins, twanging all their times in their sharp voices like cigar box guitars. They took liberties on my store that I would never dare, since Mama told us that the less you say to white folks, even po-white trash, the better. Bailey and I would stand solemn, quiet in the displaced air. But if one of the playful apparitions got too close to us, let's do that one again. But if one of the playful apparitions got close to us, I pinched it, partly out of anger, frustration, and partly because I didn't believe in its flesh reality. They called my uncle by his first name and ordered him around the store. He, to my crying shame, obeyed them in his limping, dip fashion. My grandmother, too, followed their orders, except that she didn't seem to be servile because she anticipated their needs. Here's sugar, Mrs. Potter, and here's baking powder. You didn't buy soda last month. You'll probably be needing some. Mama always directed her statements to the adults, but sometimes, oh, painful sometimes, the grimy, snotty-nosed girls would answer her. Nah, Annie, to Mama, who owned the land they lived on, who forgot more than they would ever learn. If there was any justice in the world, God would strike them dumb at once. Just give us some extra sody crackers and some more mackerel. At least they never looked in her face, and I never caught them doing so. Nobody with a smidgen of training, not even the worst roundabout, would look in the grown person's face. It meant the person was trying to take the words out before they were formed. The dirty little children didn't do that, but they threw their orders around the store like lashes from a cat o' nine tails. When I was around 10 years old, these scruffy children caused me the most painful and confusing experience I'd ever had with my grandmother. One morning after I'd swept the dirt yard of leaves, spearmint gum wrappers, and Vienna sausage labels, I raked the yellow-red dirt and made half moons carefully, so the design stood out clearly and mask-like. I put the rake behind the store and came through the back of the house to find Grandmother on the front porch in her big white apron. The apron was so still by virtue of the starch that it could have stood alone. Mama was admiring the yard, so I joined her. It truly looked like a flat redhead that had been raked with a big tooth comb. Mama didn't say anything, but I knew she liked it. She looked over towards the school principal's house to the right of Mr. McElroy's. She was hoping one of those community pillars would see the design before the day's business wiped it out. Then she looked upward to the school. My head had swung with hers, so at just about the same time we saw a troop of the po-white trash kids marching over the hill and down the side of the school. I looked to Mama for direction. She did an excellent job of sagging from her waist down, but from the waist up she seemed to be pulling for the top of the oak tree across the road. Then she began to moan a hymn. Maybe not to moan, but the tune was so slow and the meter so strange, she could have been moaning. She didn't look at me again. When the children reached halfway down the hill, halfway to the store, she said without turning, "Sister, go inside." Go on inside. I wanted to beg her, "Mama, don't wait for them. Come on inside with me. If they come in the store, you go to the bathroom and let me wait on them. They only frighten me if you're around. Alone I know how to handle them." But of course I couldn't say anything, so I went in and stood behind the screen door. Before the girls got to the porch, I heard their laughter crackling and popping like pine logs in a cooking stove. I suppose my lifelong paranoia was born in those cold, molasses-slow minutes. They came finally to stand on the ground in front of Mama. First they pretended seriousness. One of them wrapped her right arm in the crook of her left, pushed out her mouth, and started to hum. I realized she was aping my grandmother. Another said, "No, Helen, you ain't standing like her. Here's it. This here's it." Then she lifted her chest, folded her arms, and mocked that strange carriage that was Annie Henderson. Another laughed. "Now, can't you do it? Your mouth ain't pooched out enough. It's like this. You can't do it. Your mouth ain't pooched out enough like this." I thought about the rifle behind the door, but I knew I'd never be able to hold it straight. And the .410, our sawed-off shotgun, which stayed loaded, was fired every New Year's night, was locked in the trunk, and Uncle Willie had the key in his chain. Through the fly-speck screen door, I could see that the arms of Mama's apron jiggled from the vibrations of her humming, but her knees seemed to have been locked as if they would never bend. She sang on, no louder than before, but no softer, no slower or faster. The dirt on the girls' cotton dresses continued on their legs, feet, arms, and face to make them all of a piece. Their greasy, uncolored hair hung down, uncombed, with a grim finality. I knelt to see them better, to remember them for all time. The tears that had slipped down my dress left unsurprising dark spots and made the front yard blurry and even more unreal. The world had taken a deep breath and was having doubts about continuing to revolve. The girls had tired of mocking Mama and turned to other means of agitation. One crossed her eyes, stuck her thumbs in both sides of her mouth, and said, "Look here, Annie." Grandmother hummed on, and the apron strings trembled. I wanted to throw a handful of black pepper in their faces, to throw lye on them, to scream that they were dirty, scummy peckerwoods. But I knew I was clearly imprisoned behind the scene as the actors outside were confined to their roles. One of the smaller girls did a kind of puppet dance while her fellow clowns laughed at her. But the tall one, who was almost a woman, said something very quietly which I could not hear. They all moved backward from the porch, still watching Mama. For an awful second, I thought they were going to throw a rock at Mama, who seemed, except for the apron strings, to have turned into stone herself. But the big girl turned back, bent down, and put her hands flat on the ground. She didn't pick up anything. She simply shifted her weight and did her handstand. Her dirty bare feet and long legs went straight in the sky. Her dress fell down around her shoulders, and she had on no drawers. The slick pubic hair made a brown triangle where her legs came together. She hung in the vacuum of that lifeless morning for only a few seconds, then wavered and tumbled. The other girls clapped her on the back and slapped their hands. Mama changed her song to bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. I found that I was praying too. How long could Mama hold out? What new indignity would they think to subject her to? Would I be able to stay out of it? What would Mama really like me to do? Then they were moving out of the yard on their way to town. They bobbed their heads and shook their dark behinds and their slack behinds and turned one at a time. Bye, Annie, bye, Annie, bye, Annie. Mama never turned her head or unfolded her egg arms, but she stopped singing and said, bye, Miss Helen, bye, Miss Ruth, bye, Miss Eloise. I burst. A firecracker 4th of July burst. How could Mama call them Ms.? The mean, nasty things. Why couldn't she have come inside the sweet coal store when she saw them breasting the hill? What did she prove? And then if they were dirty, mean, and impudent, why did Mama have to call them Miss? She stood another whole song through and then opened a screen door to look down on me crying in rage. She looked until I looked up. Her face was a brown moon that shone on me. She was beautiful. Something had happened out there, which I couldn't completely understand, but I could see that she was happy. Then she bent down and touched me as mothers of the church lay hands on the sick and afflicted, and I quieted. Go wash your face, sister. And then she went behind the candy counter and hummed Glory, Glory, Hallelujah when I lay my burden down. I threw the well water on my face and used the weekday handkerchief to blow my nose. Whatever the contest had been out front, I knew Mama had won. I took the rake back to the front yard. The smudge footprints were easy to erase. I worked for a long time on my new design, and I laid the rack behind the wash pit. When I came back to the store, I took Mama's hand, and we both walked outside to look at the pattern. It was a large heart with lots of hearts growing smaller inside, and piercing from the outside rim to the smallest heart was an arrow. Mama said, Sister, that's right pretty. Then she turned to the store and resumed, Glory, glory, hallelujah, when I lay my burden down.